So tonight, we're taking, this tree was collected, not this spring, but the spring before, so 2 years ago. No, it's not 2 years ago. Just over a year ago. How's that? It's an eastern white cedar. It's native to this area. It doesn't look like much like a bonsai tree right now, but someday it will. So after I collected it, I put it in what we call a training pot. It's just a big pot to let roots grow and reestablish itself. So you can see, after you dig up a collected tree, it's quite common for branches to die off because you did quite a bit of cutting on the root system. It has to reroute all the plumbing. Some branches die off, so that's quite common for collecting trees. So this one has one main trunk. It has a bunch of little, I don't know if they're branches or trunks beside it. So the challenge is to get it to look like a little miniature forest. So that's what our challenge is. So the first thing I'm going to do, if you have any questions, just ask as we go. First thing I'm going to do is cut off these dead branches.
Is that term you use for collecting, does that have a special meaning?
It just means you find a tree in the wild or in the ground somewhere, or it can be from your garden, and you just dig it up and...
Your neighbor's garden.
No, not your neighbor's garden.
Well, that points to one thing, permission, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have
Make sure
to
you have
permission.
permission.
Our club has a collection trip once a year. We have a property near Cambridge we go to, and it's huge. It's, how many acres is it? Like
Over 300 acres.
over 300 acres.
We do have permission.
And we have permission to go in there, and we go in once a year and collect trees. And most of the ones we collect are little small trees, but not
This one?
always. That one
was
is
collected this year.
Yeah, that was collected this year.
And so are they necessarily young trees?
No,
They
not
might
necessarily.
be stunted?
They could be quite old, but small. And you can collect any type of tree. There's larches, there's pine trees, anything that takes your fancy. So this is similar if you went to a garden center and bought a tree. At this stage, it's similar to what you would get at a garden center. Usually a garden center tree has a little more of an established root system, just because it's been in a pot most of its life. Whereas one from the...
Yes, this is from the garden center.
Yeah, there's one from the garden center. Yeah, one that's being collected, sometimes, like these were growing in basically sand, and the root systems went for meters out. So when you dig them up, you know, you're cutting a lot of roots off, and so you can get lucky and get a nice root system on the tree, or you can get unlucky and you dig it up and there's like one little skinny root going somewhere. So, so that's what we mean by collected, is something that's sort of raw material to start with. So the first thing, my goal this evening is to put it into this pot, which I think it'll fit quite fine. We'll see. So the first thing I want to do is get it out of this pot. And sometimes when you're starting a tree or a forest, there's usually a front to it. So if it's on display, you're always looking at the front of the tree, which is sort of its best side. And that depends a lot on the root flare and the branches and that kind of a thing. So yeah, so we have to find like the best side for this tree. And usually it's one that shows off all the trunk lines, has an interesting arrangement. Like you wouldn't want all these trees in a line looking in at it. You'd want to see all the trunks and that kind of a thing. So one thing that can determine the front of a tree is the roots. how they flare out from the trunk. If it has like a one-sided root system, you don't want to show that off. You want to hide that. You want to put the best side of the tree to the front. So that's the first thing we're going to do. So here we go. So this was, as I said, it was collected not this spring, but the spring before. And the first year, the tree just kind of sat there and sulked. There was very little new growth on it. It didn't look vigorous at all. And what it was doing was building roots under the soil. So it should, I did a little bit of root pruning to it, but not much when I put it in the pot. I just kind of cleaned it up. So we'll see what it looks like now. See if we can get it out of the pot. So, as you can see, it's grown a lot of roots. I don't know if you can see that. It's done very well. And so the reason I put it in this bonsai soil after I collected it was to grow enough roots to eventually repot it in a bonsai pot or a smaller pot.
I'm not sure its battery's gonna last, but
So I'm going to remove all the soil from it. I'm going to check out the root structure. And we're going to try and pick a front for the tree.
I want to move up there, Barb, you can see maybe better.
What did you say about the soil? It's a particular type of soil?
Yeah, this is what we call bonsai soil. It's almost like a gravel. It's well,
Right up here.
here's some dry stuff.
hi.
It's very, you sift the soil to get out all the fine particles. And this is vermiculite, turfus, and some compost and pine bark. And you mix it together. And so it's like growing your tree in a fine gravel. There's lots of air spaces between all the particles of soil. So when you water it, all the water runs into those air spaces. The tree uses the water, and all that water in the air spaces gets replaced by fresh air then. So it gives the roots everything they need. It's kind of similar to cactus soil. This is called a root rake. It's just for combing out the roots. And it's very similar to brushing your hair, if you have a fine root system. When you start out with a tree, you don't have all these fine roots. Like when I dug it up and put it in the pot, it had like 3 or 4 large thick roots, no fine roots at all. So those have all grown this year. And that's what you want. What supplies the tree with energy is these fine feeder roots. The tips of the roots where they're white here. That's where all the action takes place, where it converts nitrogen from the air to a form of nitrogen that the tree can use. And what does that is all the microorganisms, bacteria, insects, and that live in your root system. They convert all the nutrients to something the tree can use. So the more fine roots you have, the healthier your tree will be. And when you're combing, you always get some tearing of the roots, but it's okay. So the idea with your roots is to get them to look like roots you would see in nature. So in nature, a root system, if we're looking down at the top of the tree, all the roots come out from the tree in a radial pattern. They generally don't go like this.
barring rocks and other trees.
It looks better to have them fan out nicely. It looks more like a mature tree. So that's our goal, is to get the roots look like they're transitioning from the trunk and kind of gripping the soil. It makes the tree look more mature. The ideal time to repot a cedar is when this new growth starts to extend. So it kind of goes, over winter, this growth kind of goes a dark green color. You can see somewhere in here. Some of the older growth in here is a darker green. And the tips start getting a bright green, and then they start to extend, and that's the perfect time to repot a cedar. Which wasn't too long ago. I'm repotting a little out of season, but if you put them in the shade after you've repotted them, they'll grow. Cedars like to grow roots, especially if they're well watered and have good soil. You can repot a tree any time. It's just you can't do as severe a root pruning to it. I've dug maple trees up in the middle of the summer. Sometimes the neighbor will say, "Oh, I'm digging up this tree that's grown by the fence. Do you want it?" I'll say, "Sure." So I go over and dig it up, and it's like, halfway through the summer, and if you take care of it, it grows new roots and survives. So. You just can't, neglect your tree. You have to check it for water and make sure it's not getting too much sunlight, too little sunlight. These trees, once they're established, the roots, you can put them in full sun. That's what they actually prefer. So you can see, from a collected tree, we have a pretty good root system in just 1 year.
Do you sometimes keep it for more than a year? Develop?
You can, I generally repot about every 2 years. It depends on the tree. Some trees, like cedars, can grow roots really fast, so you might want to, depends what size pots it's into. If it's in a really small pot, you would probably want to repot every year. And it depends, like if you're trying to develop your surface roots, you want to repot more often. If your tree's in the stage where all the surface roots are set and they're just kind of coiling around in the bottom of the pot, you don't really need to repot it that year. You can wait, and then they're all going to get cut off anyway. So it's mainly these surface roots that you're trying to develop, because they're the only ones you see. So I've got it pretty well raked out. You want to keep the roots moist while you're working on it. So now we're going to put it in this pot, which isn't the cleanest pot in the world, but it's... So we've got to pick a front for the tree, which direction, which angle, what height. So there's a lot of factors. So let's take this soil away. This over here, you can see over that. So I'm just going to come down and look at the tree. So we've got one main trunk, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 small trunks coming up too. So we want to give it the look of a clump of trees that'd be growing in a forest. So the most important thing is to get the main tree vertical. Generally, trees grow vertical. There's exceptions to everything. If it was on the side of a cliff, it might grow in a twisty pattern, but because this trunk is perfectly straight, well, I shouldn't say perfectly, but it's pretty straight. We want it vertical. It would look silly if it was on an angle. It would look like the tree got blown over in a storm. So we definitely want the main trunk vertical, and then these can fan out from it like they are doing as they reach for light that they're not getting under the main tree. So this isn't a bad front here. Everyone can see that. It's got the main tree in the front and all the rest of it's kind of supporting it at the sides. Just looking for if there's anything better. Now the only problem with this, using this as a front, is that the trees are kind of all in a straight line. It looks like a row of trees. However, we can direct them so they fan out more and give some depth to it. So just so it doesn't look like a line of trees. So I can't. Yeah, I think probably about there. Kind of, so these are more behind. You've got some in front here. And the main tree is sort of your focal point. This tree was taller, and there was like a branch growing off at a weird angle here that I cut off. And I just cut part way and then I pulled it, which is a deadwood section. It's sort of to simulate what would happen in nature if, I got too heavy with snow and the branch came and it stripped a part of the trunk off. So I think that's going to be our front. So this little dead one's going to be our front. So that's how we're going to put it in the pot. It's right there like that. So the first thing we're going to do is prune off all the excess roots that are just too big for the pot. So I'm going to get my scissors. And we want to prune off all the roots that grow downwards. We want to encourage all these surface roots to thicken up. Oops.
Is there a particular percentage that you want to make sure that you maintain?
Not really. Generally, they'll say you shouldn't take off more than 1/3 of the root mass. But if you do take off more and take good care of the tree, it'll live. It'll just have a tougher time growing for the next while until its roots start growing again. They reestablish.
Sort of depends on how much root mass you have and the health of the tree.
Yeah, like I've got a lot of fine feeder roots here. When it was first collected, there weren't any of these, so you usually have like a few coarse roots, and you have to be pretty careful about not taking off too much until it's grown new roots. And it depends on the species of tree too. Some of the tropical trees you can cut off all the roots and stick it in as a cutting and it'll grow. I wouldn't recommend that, but things like maples, you can cut them back to almost a stump and plant it if you do it the right time in spring, and it'll send tons of roots out. It all depends on what kind of care you give the tree afterwards. If you cut off all the roots and stick the tree in full sun and don't water it, it's not going to live. If you mist it, take care of it, check it for watering like twice a day, keep it in the shade with only a little bit of sun per day, its chances of survival are really good. So we've got our root ball pretty, I don't like calling it a root ball, but our root's pretty flat at the bottom. Another misting. So the next thing to do is keep trimming. We've got to fit it in the pot, so. This was going to be our front right there. So we're just going to. And you want to fit them in the pot so you don't want them right tight to the edge of the pot. You want to have some room for them to grow.
The size pot that you've chosen to put it in, how
Yeah.
much of this is, the size is chosen for its aesthetic purpose, and how much is the smallness of the pot contributes to what you're doing?
It's a pot that became available,
That's often the determining factor.
and not in a bad way. Sometimes when a tree dies, you suddenly have a nice pot to replace. I had another cedar in here, and I planted it as a forest planting. So this pot became available, and it's one of the larger size pots I have. It's a mica pot. It's a plastic pot, and I would, if you're growing hardy trees in Canada, I would recommend using mica pots, unless your tree's going in like a show or something. It's considered bad practice to show a tree in a plastic pot. But these things will be around longer than we will. They never break, they never crack. They're just perfect for training trees, and once you have the roots established in a pot like this, it's easy to buy a nice ceramic or clay pot someday and plant it in that. So it's getting close to fitting in there. We still have to trim a few of the roots. Yeah, I think that'll do. So the next thing we want to do is just check what surface roots we have here. So we've got a few coarse ones that we can cut back further, like say for this one. We don't want these long roots with the same thickness. We want to cut it off here and then have new roots growing out so it subdivides. So if you, let's draw a picture here. This is our root. We don't want roots that look like this coming out from the tree. We want them to look more like this, where they come out, subdivide early, subdivide again. And finer and finer until you get out. So that's what you would see in nature. On a mature tree, you'd see these roots going out and subdividing. So that's what we want to do, is any ones that are really long, that don't have any subdividing, we want to cut off shorter. Any roots that are root plane, you want, if you look at the front of the tree, look at their trunk transition into the soil.
I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I'm taking the roots off.
So we're looking for roots that kind of
Fresh start.
don't do that. And see one here that could be bent down, but I think we'll cut it
I had
off.
a garage too last year. in the garage.
There's a few roots up here that are kind of high. Prune off. There's a really thick one here. I'm going to prune off. Some other ones here.
It's really healthy there, Michael. Look it up.
So you kind of have to imagine a soil line where your soil's going to eventually come. You want to show some of these surface roots coming out, but you don't want to plant the tree too high and have these all dry out and die. So it's important to not rush exposing your surface roots. You know, every year, or every time you repot it, you move it up a little higher. You don't want to have it too high in your initial planting, or they'll all die on the surface. They'll dry out too quickly. Unless you mist your tree all day, every day, baby it, it may survive. But okay, so the front of our tree again is right here. Okay, so the next thing to do is this pot's not very clean. However, it'll do. Is we put some drainage screens in the bottom of our pot, so you can see the holes in the bottom of the pot, just so your soil doesn't run out. And it keeps insects from crawling up into your soil too.
Too much to give you confused.
Some people use a large size screen, and I don't, just for that reason, that I don't want insects crawling up through the holes into your soil. So I've got a layer in the bottom of the pot now. So the next thing to do is, we've picked the front of the tree, we want to establish a height in the pot. So I'm going to put the tree in. This is the front. Where's the front? Right here. And generally your soil line is just slightly below the lip of the pot. So you can, let me just draw another diagram here. So if this is your pot, this is your side here. To me, the ideal soil level is about here, and it gives a little room for your moss to come up. So when you're looking at the top of the pot, your moss is just about level with the lip of the pot. You want to see all the lip of your pot all the way around. If you have moss overhanging it, it looks just untidy. because bonsai is a tree in a pot, so the pot has as much importance as the tree. It's a relationship. It's like a painting in its frame. The two go hand in hand. So some people they'll mound the soil up and have their tree at a higher level like this. To me, unless this is all, roots coming down here, if this is actual soil and your roots are coming down here, to me it just looks like you couldn't fit the tree in the pot. It looks like you had too many roots down below and it's lifted up in the pot because you couldn't fit it in. So I always like to have my soil level just below the lip of the pot. And I've seen trees that are mounted up in the middle and they look quite nice, especially if it's in a large landscape pot. It looks like it's on a bit of a hill or something. But generally in a pot like this, I like the soil to be level. So I'm just looking at the height of the tree now. It's not too bad there, actually. Some of these lower branches won't be in the soil. There's enough roots that are down below that it'll grow really nice and healthy. Let me just look at it from the front. Yeah, it's not too bad height. The next thing in the pot here, because this tree has a lot of growth off to this side, you want the overall composition to look balanced in the end. You don't want a tree, I'm going to exaggerate this, but if this is your pot, you don't want your tree growing off to the side here. It would look kind of ridiculous. You would want sort of, imagine the center of the mass of the tree somewhere about here. You'd want that kind of on the center line of the pot, so so it visually looks balanced. Unless you're at one drama where you want the tree to look like it's on the edge of tipping over, or it doesn't always have to look peaceful and pleasant. It can look, some trees are quite dramatic and they look like they're about to tip over and tip out of the pot. But this one, being a tall tree like this, we want it to look stable, mature, and balanced in the pot. So I'm going to have to shift the tree over to this side. And and it's just, your taste. I'm thinking about there. You guys, think it looks okay? Excellent. Okay. Dave? Yep. Looks sort of balanced. Okay. All right. So, the next step is to start working the soil into the roots again. So, I usually just put a little bit in at a time. And then I you can use chopsticks or anything that you can use a stick, whatever. And you just start working the soil into the roots.
See how the branches go.
What you don't want is, air pockets around the roots where they're just sitting in with no soil in contact with them. Hi everyone. My video card filled at the meeting last night, so I'm going to continue on with this tree today. the only thing we have left to do to the tree is to put some moss on the soil, and that's about it. It would be very tempting to go in and start styling this tree, but we're not going to. You should do one thing at a time on bonsai. We've repotted the tree. It's put the tree under a lot of stress, cutting a lot of roots off. We don't want to start wiring the tree or pruning it until you know, the roots start growing again and the tree regains its vigor. Usually when you prune a lot of roots off, they say you should reduce the top foliage. That's true in a lot of cases if your tree's outside. I'm going to put this tree into the greenhouse on the floor where it's very humid, so you get very little water loss from the leaves, the needles on the tree. So it should be able to support all this foliage fine until the roots start growing again. So I'm not going to touch the top of the tree at all. We're going to save that for another video. But I am going to get some moss on the base of the tree, and we'll come back and have a look at it when it's all done. Well, we're back. Yesterday I had a sudden thunderstorm, so it's now the next day. 3 days later since we started the tree. So I finished the landscaping, and we'll go in and have a look at it. So here we are. Now I've tried to kind of simulate the area where the tree was dug up, and it had a lot of sand and grasses and foliage around it, sparsely placed. So I've tried to duplicate that in my planting here, and it kind of reminds me of, you know, that day where we went on our field trip and dug the tree up. Yeah, so it's kind of brings back good memories. So there's the landscape. And I'm just dying to start working on the trees, but you know, we gotta wait. We just have to wait. So that's it for today. We've taken our collected tree from nature, got it in a bonsai pot, done some landscaping, and the next task will be styling the top of the tree. I kind of like this cedar clump. It's already has some style to it with these small trunks coming off to the one side and some of the trunks on the other side. So I think it's going to look really nice in future. So we'll keep updates of this tree as it progresses. And that's it for today. So Nigel Saunders for KW Bonsai. We'll see you next time.